Another kind of strain that has sort of come up in the last few years, this idea of kind of Christian nationalism. And I mean, I think both as Catholics and I think Anglicans in particular, there is a sense that a church can exist within a particular kind of nation with its own particular, style and nuances. But how do you think the nation and Christianity, which has such a kind of claim on a universal claim, how do those two kind of work together? And is it something that we kind of should look for, or is it something that we should kind of maybe push against a bit?
I think we should be very worried about it, because the way that that's come up, particularly, is that since the Reformation and the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, certainly in the West, Christian faith has been very much about me and my spirituality and my heavenly home, etc., and away from kind of geo-imperialism. But that leaves a vacuum, and the geo-imperialism has been making a comeback. And then particularly with the founding of both the United States and Canada and various other places, a sense of trying to retrieve bits of the Old Testament as though now we were the new chosen people. I mean, I lived in Montreal for 5 years, and the old Quebecois folk ways of telling it were that French Canada was the new Jerusalem. Well, and America has its own versions of that, and city set on a hill, etc. And the danger of that is that you idolize your own existence, and precisely then you forget the responsibility for the outsider and the alien and the stranger and so on. And the other thing to remember is that the idea that we have today in the modern Western world of a nation is a very, very modern idea. People in the first century, most countries did not have borders that were policed in the way that we think of them. They had a capital city or whatever, and the hinterland around that was the nation, but there were all sorts of areas where anything might happen out in the wilds. And so our idea of fixed nations and how they run themselves is a very modern idea, and we have to be careful then of simply grabbing bits of Christianity that seem to sustain our sense, particularly our ambitions. And I mean, you'd have thought that after the 20th century nobody would want to go near Christian nationalism, but it's coming up again. And the other point,
if I may,
sure.
I wouldn't say maybe push back, but just say, and yet the Incarnation, meant that Christ was born in a particular place, and that the church, there were the churches of these different cities, and they all had their particular kind of way of doing things, and in a sense that's always been part of the rich kind of tapestry of Christianity.
That's certainly true. I mean, the 5 great seas in the 3rd and 4th century and 5th century, etc., which were very different culturally. I mean, from Athens to Alexandria with Antioch and others in between, and Rome. But in the middle of all of that, the early church, they travelled a lot. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. The Roman road system was such that if you look at people going around, Ignatius on his way to Rome to be martyred, he's able to travel through several countries, and they seem to have got about, and Paul's letters are circulated all over the place, etc., etc. So I don't think there was that sense that we would know now of, I belong in Greece and that's where I am. Of course, ordinary poor people often didn't travel at all. They didn't travel from their village. Still some parts of the world today where that's true. Still some parts of this country, actually, where that's true. But
London, mainly, stay within the M25.
Well, no, but I mean, I'm from the northeast, and there are towns and villages I know in the northeast where the furthest away people have ever been would be maybe to York on one occasion, and then they scurried back to Newcastle or Sunderland or wherever. Oh, I went south. That was far too much. And yeah, I mean, we laugh, but it's how many people still do live. Anyway, the sense of belonging to a place, yes, that is built in, but Jesus being born as a Judean and then living in Galilee and then ministering in that part of the world, if you go back to the Psalms and the prophets, especially Isaiah, again and again, the texts that the early Christians and Jesus himself draw on are all about, it's too light for you just to be the light for Israel. I will give you a light to the nations that my glory may extend to the whole world. And that's already built in to one of the basic Psalms, Psalm 2, where the promise to Abraham about I'll give you this land as an inheritance is transformed, and God says to the Davidic king, I will give you the nations as your inheritance, the uttermost parts of the world for your possession. And then Jesus at the beginning of Acts says, you'll be going from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, with the sense that now there is one single kingdom, which is God's kingdom, and it doesn't look like human kingdoms. And then that's where you have the whole redefinition of what being a king is all about, as in Mark 10, where James and John want to sit at Jesus' right and his left. They want to be Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary or whatever. I think they're stealing a march on Peter and Andrew in case they get in first. And Jesus says, listen, you have no idea. That's how the rulers of this age organize things. We're going to do it the other way. The one who wants to be great among you must be your servant, because the Son of Man came to give his life, etc. And so there's a sense of redefinition of empire, redefinition of what rulership really means. As Bishop Barron was saying last night, people in the ancient world, and many in the modern world, live on the principle of peace comes through violence.
Yeah.
You squash all the opposition, and then we have peace, don't we? Tacitus reports that the ancient Britain said at the end of the first century, they make a wilderness and call it peace. Well, we're still there. But in terms of the kingdom of God, we look after the poor and the disadvantaged and the humble and the weak. And that is what we call a kingdom. And that is the true shalom.